Thank you all for being here tonight. As I told you last week, this week and next week are a little bit different. And then we're going to take two Psalms at a time. So tonight we're going to be looking at Psalm 124 and 125 and thinking about the ideas of help and security reflected in these Psalms. And also talk a little bit as we're concluding how the two fit together, how we connect those things, and maybe some ways in which they're not as connected as we might think. So we just kind of explore all that as we go tonight. We're going to use the same pattern we've used. I'm going to read the psalm the first time, and you're just going to listen. And I'm going to read them both. I'm going to read them back to back the first time, and you're just going to listen. The second time that I read them tonight, I'm going to ask you to think about how you would describe them. Kind of what descriptor might you apply to this psalm? Just in one or two words. What characteristic comes out that you would say, that kind of sounds like this to me? And then the third time, we'll talk about where we might hear echoes of help or security in these psalms. So, remember, the first time, you're just going to listen. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Lord, do good to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. Peace be on Israel. Okay, so as I read it again, think about words you might use to describe one or both of these psalms. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Lord, do good to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. Peace be on Israel. Take a moment, talk around your tables about how you might describe one or both of those psalms. There's a way of if you had to tell someone, well, I think this psalm is kind of this. How would you describe it? Take a couple of moments, talk about that, and then we'll listen to what you have to say. So what do you think? How would you describe one or both? Or encouraging? Okay. Nancy?
I would have flipped them.
You would have flipped them.
I would have said security for 124 and hope for 125.
So you're going to edit the Bible on us tonight, huh? You're going to edit the Bible on us, huh?
That's my job.
I'll give you that vote too, because I would agree with you.
A lot of evil.
That's exactly how I read it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Could have gone either way.
See?
Could have gone either way. Okay.
I feel like it was filled with a lot of praise to God.
Okay. A lot of praise, a lot of thankfulness. Okay. The word I associate with Psalm 124 is relief. Talk more about that in a minute, but I feel like there's somebody they're just glad they got there. This is a song of the pilgrims, right? Going up to worship. It's like, good grief, we wouldn't have made it without God's help. I'm just glad we got here. The second one to me is Psalm 125. The word that comes to mind is confident. Yeah, confident. That they're confident that now that they're there, they got there by God's help. They're confident that now that they're there, they're in a place that's secure. Which may be why Peterson uses the order that he does in talking about it that way. And we'll talk about it. I don't think it's wrong that you can flip them or you go, Let me read it one more time. And I do want you to listen specifically for echoes of help, echoes of security. What communicates that to you? If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side, when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their anger flared against us, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endure forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and forevermore. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Lord, do good to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But to those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. Peace be on Israel.
A lot of evil.
What's that?
A lot of evil.
There's a lot of evil in there. You're right.
Yeah.
Talk for a minute around your table. What are the things that say, oh, this says help to me, this says security to me? What are the echoes in that you hear that start to lead in that direction? So take a couple minutes to talk about that. So what echoes of help are there? What do you hear that says, that reflects their praise for God's help?
He never leave us.
God never leaves us,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
He will not abandon us.
You didn't go off and leave us.
He didn't go off and leave us.
Well, they realized they were in danger.
They realized they were in danger. And so they say, if it were not for God, this and this and this would have happened. Maureen?
If you're a bad guy, you better look out for that lightning bolt.
Do what now?
If you're a bad guy, you better look
You
out
better
for
look
that
out for
lightning
that.
bolt.
Yeah. God will banish the evildoers. So what does that have to do with security?
We're secure in God.
Do what?
We're secure in God.
We're secure in God.
We have the waves around us.
We're surrounded, he says in there. He says, we are like a fortress. Not we're in a fortress, we are like a fortress. Think about we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. I think there's a lot in these two that point to our dependence upon God in difficult situations. Ordinary difficult situations and extraordinary difficult situations. So, in his chapter on 124, Peterson says, discipleship is hazardous. He tells a story about, some of you read the book, and I know some of you don't, but he tells a story about how he was going to give blood in a blood donation drive. And he walks up and they ask him if he has a hazardous job, and he says yes. And the lady looks at him kind of funny, and she said, I don't mean like that. She marks no, because I guess she knows him. But he goes on to say, he goes on to say that, what I do really is hazardous work, and what we all do as disciples is hazardous. Here's what he says about that. What is hazardous in my life, in my work as a Christian? Every day I put faith on the line. I've never seen God. In a world where nearly everything can be weighed, explained, quantified, subjected to psychological analysis and scientific control, I persist in making the center of my life a God whom no eye hath seen nor ear heard, whose will no one can probe. That's a risk. Every day I put hope on the line. I don't know one thing about the future. I don't know what the next hour will hold. There may be sickness, accident, personal, or world catastrophe, and before this day is over, I might have to deal with death, pain, loss, rejection. I don't know what the future holds for me, for those I love, for my nation, for this world. Still, despite my ignorance and surrounded by tinny optimists and cowardly pessimists, I say that God will accomplish God's will, and I cheerfully persist in living in the hope that nothing will separate me from Christ's love. Every day I put love on the line. There is nothing I am less good at than love. I'm far better in competition than in love. I'm far better in responding to my instincts and ambitions to get ahead and make my mark than I am figuring out how to love another. I am schooled and trained in acquisitive skills in getting my own way, and yet I decide every day to set aside what I can do best and attempt what I do very clumsily upon myself to the frustrations and failures of loving, daring to believe that failing as love is better than succeeding in pride. All that is hazardous work. I live on the edge of defeat all the time. I've never done any one of those things to my or anyone else's satisfaction. I live in the dragon's maw and at the flood's edge. Discipleship is hazardous. And he says it's hazardous because it requires a risk. what Psalm 124 is identifying is the riskiness of the pilgrimage. And so it begins by saying, if it were not for God, and it's really interesting to me that what the psalmist does here is almost replicate what the singing of that psalm would have been like with somebody leading it. Because he says, if it were not for God, let everybody sing. Let all Israel say, everybody sing along with me. If it were not for God, these things might have happened along the way. And he identifies 3 potential perils for the pilgrim there, right? What's the first one he talks about? In Psalm 124.
People attacking?
Attack.
Yeah.
Not uncommon in the days when the pilgrims were making their way up to Jerusalem, that they might be attacked on the road. We know the story of the man who was going down to Jericho. Jesus tells the story. We know about, in that day, if you can imagine, humans still being humans like they've always been humans would take advantage of groups of pilgrims making their way up to temple, up to worship. And so they might be attacked. They might be attacked by other forces that have attacked them over, just the experience of being attacked over time from invading groups or whatever else. It's all over Israel's history. But it's interesting that sense of attack takes on almost the idea of a creature. Because he says we would have been attacked, and he says what? We would have been swallowed up. And then at the end, down in verse 9, he says, praise be to the Lord who has not let us be torn by their teeth. Peterson takes that and he kind of applies the image from mythology of a dragon. If you think about the way a dragon is used in myth or in literature, dragons are often representatives of all of the bad things in the world. All of the evil forces in the world, all of the scary things in the world become embodied in mythology in dragons. They're the things that can consume us. And that's what he's talking about. He's not just talking about being attacked and somebody taking our money we were going to use to buy the goat when we got to the temple. He's not talking about just that. He's talking about actually being consumed by them, destroyed by them. And I wonder, if we might think for a few minutes tonight about what are those dragons in our lives that on our pilgrimage of discipleship, as we're risking faith and hope and love and all the ways that Peterson talks about, what are those dragons that make putting those things out there risky? What are those dragons that attack us in that sense? What are those things that can take over, can consume us when we're trying to live the life of discipleship, when we're walking this pilgrimage with God? So that's one thing he identifies. What's the second thing he identifies there? Flood. Interesting choice. Why might floods be perilous to pilgrims in that day? If they couldn't swim, yeah, that would certainly be a problem. No life vest probably handed out on the trip. Yeah.
Sometimes flood doesn't mind your swimming ability.
Yeah, sometimes the flood doesn't care if you can swim or not. You just get swept away. And that's why he says we're not swept away. He doesn't say it doesn't flood. He says we're not swept away by the flood. Flash floods were a huge problem. And so when I was a kid, and then even in all the time we spent in Georgia, I didn't really understand flash flooding. I'd never seen a flood I didn't see coming. because I'm accustomed to river flooding and in flat land, or river flooding where we lived in Georgia, both places, to where you knew you were going to have a flood because it was raining upriver, and so they did things like shut floodgates and things like that. Very rarely have I lived in a situation where flash floods were a real problem. Until I got here and saw what happens down in eastern Kentucky when you get a hard rain in the holler. And what it does, and it happens instantly. It just comes. And that's the way it would have been in that day. That you have, they're in these highland hills and valleys, and if there's a huge rainstorm, there's no water management. There are no storm drains. The water would flood, guess where? Down the roadways. Because that's where they're walking. And so, flash floods were a real danger for pilgrims in that day. So these are real risks, but as we're thinking about the psalmist, and we're trying to understand what it means for our life of discipleship, what are those flash floods that we can get caught in? Those things that we don't see coming, that we don't anticipate, that can literally flood our lives. I mean, some of you have had the experience of a flash flood in a doctor's office, right? Everything's fine. It's a bright, sunny day. And then the doctor walks out and says, well, we need to talk about this test result. Or you get a phone call from a family member or a friend. And it changes your life. That's part of what Peterson's talking about there. And we're risking our hope, we're risking our faith because we don't know what's going to happen. And those floods can come out of nowhere. And we're vulnerable to those things. And we remain vulnerable. If you've been in the experience of a really bad storm, we probably, and maybe this applies to you, but you probably all know people that when the storm warnings come, they immediately get anxious because of past experience. I finally figured out about a month ago, I finally figured out that I had to change the ringtone on my phone because therefore, you all know about my dad's illness and his death and all that. And there was a time that I got so many calls and things were changing so much. I realized about a month ago that ringtone on my phone was triggering that for me. And I had to change the ringtone so that I didn't hear that, because I heard that sound and everything kicked in, the whole system kicked in. And it was, the last time it was called was Jack called me if I was watching the race. But I thought, oh my gosh, what's happened? And we have those experiences. And so it's not just the moment of the flood, it's our experience of the flood that is we're getting up the next day and putting our faith and our hope out there and feeling vulnerable. We have an encounter that reminds us of that, and we have to struggle with that too. And so that makes us feel all these things. Part of why they're so risky to us is they make us feel vulnerable because we can't control them. There's one more there that he mentions. Kind of skip down to the end. He says, I have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. There are traps. There are traps out there. There are things that we can get caught in that we don't necessarily see. And we need help getting out of them. That's what underlies all of this, is all of these are situations that we can't control, and we get it, and we need help. And the psalmist is saying, God has been our help. And as I said a moment ago, I think the image here is of the pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem and thinking, okay, we made it through the possible attacks, we made it through the floods, We didn't get trapped anywhere, and we're here because God is our help. To me, Psalm 124 is a song of testimony about God's help. And I would imagine we could go around the room tonight and everybody here could tell a story about God's help. About a time when the dragon was coming, when the floodwaters were rising, when you felt entrapped, and when God helped. And in fact, we sing songs like this all the time, don't we? What are some other songs of help that we sing? How about, O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home? What are some other ones? What are some other songs of help that we sing? Great is thy faithfulness. Yeah. Been faithful time and time again.
God is our refuge and our strength.
God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. I'm sorry? Our help is in the name of the Lord.
Whispering hope.
Whispering hope.
Wait, oldie.
Yeah, that's a goldie oldie. Yeah. Sure. How about a mighty fortress is our God, a refuge never failing. Our helper, he amidst the flood of mortal ills prevail. A lot of our hymnals full of songs of help because we've had this experience. We've been in that place where we too have risked our faith and our hope and our love and been out there and been vulnerable and had that experience where God has helped us. And so we rejoice together in God's help for us. One of my favorites is the line from the hymn, "Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." Do you know the story of the Ebenezer? Ebenezer literally means a stone of help. And it's all about time in the reign of Saul, and they set up a marker, and they said, "Here, by this stone, we will remember that God got us this far." These songs are our way of saying God has helped us to this place. And the place to which God has brought us in the way that the Psalms are ordered is this place of security. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. Now, it's interesting to me that the psalmist does not say, those who trust in the Lord are hidden in Mount Zion. It says, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. What do you think about that, Moses?
My first thought is that those who trust in the Lord themselves are like pillars because God indwells them. So
Okay.
there's a shield from within, spreading out and around them. So
Yeah.
they can't be moved.
If you read Psalm 125, to me, what it says is that we have this sense of security. We can trust, and when we trust, we belong to God. And because we belong to God, we are like Zion. We're like this mountain. Imagine these pilgrims singing their way along. They get to the temple, and they're there, and they're standing there in the glory and the grandeur of the temple, and they say, those who trust in the Lord are like this. Surrounded, that was one of the words we picked up earlier tonight. Surrounded by God's presence, we become, in and of ourselves, a fortress. God helps us when we feel vulnerable, but when we recognize that we indeed belong to God, then we are actually a fortress. We cannot be shaken. Endures forever as the mountains surround Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a fortress of a city. That was kind of the idea. And so we look in the ancient world, there were often cities built in the mountains because the mountains themselves were protective. The mountains themselves were meant to be the fortress. And so he says, we're like that, like these mountains that surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. So part of the security is that in that place, we belong to God, we're surrounded by God, in that presence makes of us a fortress. But there's another movement here. What do you make of verses 3 and 4 and 5? Aside from watch out for the lightning bolt, which is what Marie said a minute ago. Not entirely wrong, but what do we do with that? What do you make of that? What does it have to do with this idea of being secure, of Israel being at peace, which is the way that they end the song, right? What does it have to do with that? What's verse 3, 4, and 5 doing? I'll give you a minute to ponder and talk about that, and then see what you come up with. So what do you think? What do you do with that? How's that part of Jerusalem, metaphorically here, of us being that place of security? What's the connection with that idea in maybe these couple of verses?
So easy to follow the crowd sometimes.
It's easy to follow the crowd, okay? Okay? Okay.
So it's like being secure, being a place where we won't be tempted. He's doing what he's supposed to do so we don't get tempted to
Okay.
do evil.
So God remains at work even when we're in that secure place to to keep us from being tempted, to keep us from being drawn back into that. I think that's headed there for sure. That the fortress, in that fortress mentality, we're surrounded like the mountains surround Jerusalem, indicates that all the enemy's on the outside. The psalmist knows that there are also enemies on the inside. Those things that want to control our lives, that God is at work removing, so that we can be secure in trust, so that we can know the wholeness, shalom, the peace of God. Those things have to be removed, and God is, and what the psalmist is saying is that's God's work in us too. Removing those things, removing those deepest anxieties and fears. I think what fear is what keeps us so often from trusting. Afraid of unknown dangers, afraid of what could happen, afraid of what we can't see, can't understand. So if we're afraid of those things, we can't put our hope at risk, can we? To be pilgrims, if we're afraid of what could happen in those unknown dangers. And let's face it, we live in a world that's constantly telling us to be afraid. We live in a world that's constantly trying to get us to be afraid. Why is that, by the way? Control. It's easier to control people who are fearful. And all of us who are parents in the room, let's be honest, we used fear at least once or twice with our children, didn't we? Yeah. Don't go in that closet. The boogeyman's in that closet. Don't go in that closet. Whatever it is. We use those things sometimes, and so we understand fear can be a tool. We can't trust God fully when we're afraid. We're afraid of things that are unknown. We're afraid of our own failure. So we don't risk as disciples because we're afraid we're going to fail. And what the psalmist is saying, well, that's the kind of thing that God's trying to kick out of the fortress. Is that sort of basic fear so that we can trust. And we don't know this, it's kind of like the Damoclean sword. We don't know when the next thing's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to, and so we live in that anxiety. There's a great story I read again this week. It's an old story. It's about a monastery in Portugal that was only accessible by basket. And so the basket would be attached to a rope, and they had a pulley system that would pull the basket across. And a young man was visiting the monastery, and he noticed that the rope holding the basket was somewhat frayed. And he got over to the monastery, and he asked the brother who was pulling the rope over, "How often do you replace the rope?" And he said, "Well, when it breaks." And that describes how we live sometimes, doesn't it? We see the rope fraying. And I think part of what the psalmist is saying here is that God has to be at work in us, moving those things out, clearing out that space. Don't let those, I love the way the image says, the scepter of the evil will not persist, will not remain. It doesn't mean that there are not going to be pockets of those things in our lives. It means they won't be in charge. If we're trusting, if we have this sense of security that we belong to God, we're surrounded by God's care for us, and that God's at work even helping us to move away from our fears and closer into trust, they're still going to be there. Still pockets of that. Still those things we deal with. But they won't be in charge because we're trusting in God's presence. And it makes some sense as we look at this that we move from our experiences of God's help into trust and security. But does that cause you any concern? Does that offer any pause? That sometimes God's help doesn't immediately lead us to a secure place, or at least to a place where we feel secure. And I want to acknowledge at that point, what I'm talking about is our perception of where we are, not what God knows about where we are, or what God knows about what's going on, but as disciples trying to walk the path, our perception of that sometimes is that we get help, but we don't get to the fortress because we're still on the path, we're still on the road, and so we didn't get swept away by that flood, but it started raining again, and I don't feel like I'm home yet. And so to make the quick connection from help to security, I think we have to be honest, because if nothing else, the Psalms are honest. One of the things that I love about the Psalms is that they're honest. And you can go back, and I don't know if you've ever studied the imprecatory Psalms. That's what's one of those fancy words that you pay for in seminary. But the imprecatory Psalms are the Psalms where people are just mad, and they're letting everybody know they're mad, and they're praying to God to do things to their enemies. And they're in there. Why are they in the book, the same book where Jesus says, turn the other cheek? Why are they in the same book? Because they're honest about our experience as children of God, that sometimes that's how we feel about things. And I think it's God's way of saying, you can pray that way. I can handle that. I can hear that. And I can help you there, but you may be a little ways away from security still. And I think it's important when we hear these prayers, we sing these songs, that we're mindful that we're still in this mess of humanity in which we live, that it's not so quick and simple that you just go from A to B all the time. Another story I heard this week that I think helps put the two together also has to do with a rope. I don't know why I'm connected to rope stories this week, but it's just kind of how it happens sometimes. There are a group, and this is a true story. There are a group of botanists who were in Austria, and they came across, identified what they believed to be a very rare specimen of a plant that they had some question about whether it was still in existence or not. There were old records of it, and they were surveying this kind of mountainous area, and with binoculars, they found what they believed to be a specimen of this particular plant, but it was down in a deep ravine. And not to take any swipes at botanists at all, but evidently these particular botanists felt athletic enough to go down in the ravine to get the plant. And so they were there, and there was a young boy walking by who lived in the area, and they asked him, said, you know these hills, you climb in these hills? And he said, yes. And they said, well, would you be willing to go down there and get that plant for us? And he just walked away, which seems reasonable to me, what I probably would have done as well. And as they were trying to decide what they were going to do, a few minutes later, he walked up with a rope and with an older gentleman. And he said, okay, if you will tie this rope to me and hold the rope, I'll go down there. But he has to hold the rope. He's my father. I think that's help towards security. It puts the two together. It was still risky, right? It's still risky for this young man to go down in this crevasse and retrieve this flower and bring it back up. It's still a risky thing to do. The rope is the rope. They could break, they could do whatever else, but there was a trust there that as long as his father was holding the rope, he was going to be okay. To me, that's the kind of security, that concept of security seems to resonate more with my daily life of discipleship than a fortress and a mountain, I'll be honest. I think the feeling of fortress where I feel like I'm a fortress is not all the time. Do I feel like somebody's holding the rope? I get that a little bit more. But there are times when God helps us when there's no rope, much less no fortress. And we just have to keep living into that. We have to keep going along with that. So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask you about songs of help. What are songs of security? Songs of trust? Not about God's help for us, but about our trust in God because of our experience with God. What are some of those songs that come to mind?
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness.
Trust and obey.
Trust and obey.
Great is our faithfulness.
Great is thy faithfulness.
How sweet the name of Jesus sounds.
How sweet the name of Jesus sounds. Rock of ages, cleft for me. Any other?
He leadeth me.
He leadeth me. Okay. Are you just throwing that out? And you don't feel real confident.
Maybe.
It's there.
It's a different way.
Any others?
Because he lives on Christ.
Because he lives. Yeah.
And can it be?
And can it be?
Especially the words or the end or whatever it is. Bold I approach thee, turn throne, claim the crown. I can't sing.
Claim the crown that is thine own. Yeah.
Whatever.
What a friend,
You don't have to be able to quote it. It's okay.
Good.
It's not a pop quiz.
what a friend we have in Jesus.
What a friend we have in Jesus.
On Christ the solid rock I stand.
On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking the sand.
I surrender all.
I surrender all.
Shepherd of my soul.
Shepherd of my soul.
Victory in Jesus.
Victory in Jesus. The unofficial seminary hymn of the Candler School of Theology, deemed so because it was Fred Craddock's favorite hymn, was Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. It was the first hymn we sang in the school year and the last hymn we sang as we closed it every year. It makes sense to us, doesn't it, that our response to such a visceral thing as being helped by God and feeling that sense of being secure in God's love and care for us would find its way out best in song. Because it's in our singing. It's the thing I keep coming back to with these songs of ascents, that it's in that singing that we expressed more holistically than any other way both what we know and what we feel and how we live at the same time. There's something in it that obviously has been a part of who we are for thousands of years, because these are recorded songs that speak to that experience, and we keep doing it over and over and over again from generation to generation. And even now, people are writing new songs all the time, expressing that same basic understanding of who we are to God and the fact that we can trust. And I think both Psalm 124 and Psalm 125 are songs of testimony, are songs by people who say, I have had this experience. And I think that's one of the most effective ways we have to communicate with others about what faith means to us. You know, we can give the spiel, we can quote chapter and verse, and that's important. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes just telling that story of what God has done in our lives in an honest way And that's the biggest piece. Because other people who are struggling, if we make it look way too easy, it's not helpful to them. Now, I'm not saying create a crisis. I'm not saying do that. But if we're honest about that, like these Psalms are honest, then that helps us communicate in a completely different level who God is and what God's doing in our lives and what God can do in their lives. Next week, we'll take 126, 127. We'll talk about joy and happiness as we pick up the next two. All right? Thank you for being here. Let me pray for us and we'll go. Oh God, you are our help. And we need it. Because you know far better than we how risky this thing called discipleship really is. And so we look to you for our help. And we will acknowledge and praise you for that help as we go. And we hope to find that place of security in your presence, to know that you never will leave us, that you do surround us with your love and your care at all times. And so send us out tonight in that confidence of who you are and what you're doing in our lives in ways that would cause us to share it with others. For it's in Christ's name we pray.